And I'm glad you saved the date today because we have our favorite speaker, Bruce Herschensohn, who is in American politics as strong and indelible fixture as anybody I can name. He's received from the federal government the Distinguished Service Medal. He was deputy assistant to President Richard Nixon at the White House. He was one of the 10 outstanding young men in the federal government. That's an incredible honor in itself. He's visited over 90 countries, 87 of them more than once. No, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. No, he's visited 90 countries. I wish I hadn't said that. Bruce is too. And he was a member of the Reagan transition team. He was a popular KABC TV and radio commentator for several years. He was, as you know, the 92 Republican nominee for Senate. And if it was up to me, he'd be our nominee next year. How many of you believe that and want that? He's been at Pepperdine since 1998 as professor, as chairman, and now a senior fellow. And imagine that class, imagine those students who get the stimulation from Bruce in their classes. He is a close and good friend of the foundation, of mine and of the Nixon family. And above all those things that I've just told you, there's one thing that Bruce is particularly proud of. And he doesn't talk about. He is modest, as you know. Bruce is seldom, talking about all his accomplishments. But Bruce started in Hollywood as a bag boy at Ralph's Grocery, and that's what he's most proud of. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present the author of this great book, Obama's Globe, who will be available in our lobby right afterwards to sign it and inscribe it, and it is incredibly insightful on what our president has done to abandon our allies all over the world. And I hope you'll buy it. It's available by pure coincidence in our gift shop as we speak and immediately after this program. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bruce Herschensohn.
85 of them twice.
Yeah, well, anyway.
I wish I had.
Well, I do too. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks very much. Yes, I've been to, as Sandy said, I have been to some of those countries twice, and I'm so glad that he made mention of that. I know this is a very sensitive subject. Some of you may agree, some of you may disagree. But I certainly want your comments and questions afterwards. In 76 days, it's going to be Election Day. And I believe that no matter which of the two men become the winner that evening or the following morning, that winner is going to be a wartime president. I don't see any other way. And the reason I say that is because of the events of the last 3.5 years. The president started out by giving a timeline on when we would leave Iraq. And then midterm, a little before midterm, a timeline on when we would leave Afghanistan. Didn't anyone in his administration tell him that in the service, first day of basic training, you're told if you ever are captured by the enemy, there are only 3 things that you tell the enemy. And I see some nod. Name, rank, and serial number. And boy, you embed those in your head. And my guess is that those who are nodding right now probably could name all 3 of those things because it never, ever leaves you. That's it. Name, rank, serial number. But now we have a commander-in-chief who tells the enemy when our military forces are going to leave. That, to me, is absolutely incredible. And doesn't he have anyone in his administration, if he doesn't know it, who would remind him of what Winston Churchill said after the terrible Battle of Dunkirk? He said, "Wars cannot be won by evacuation." And then, a year and a half later, the morning of December the 8th, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt spoke to a joint session of the Congress. And he said, "We will win this war all the way to absolute victory." And before the end of the speech, he went back to the theme of victory and said that we're going to achieve victory no matter how long it takes. No calendar, no date attached. It would be until we were victorious. And Winston Churchill had that great symbol of V for victory. That got turned around in the early 1960s to mean quite the opposite. To recognize that that's how you win a war seems to me the utmost of logic. If one side leaves a war and the other side doesn't, eventually that side's going to win. There may be a short intermission when one side leaves, but one side is going to win, and it's going to be the side that stays. Wars are not ended. They're either won or lost. And in Asia, there's a story that's very well known. I think it's well known now in the United States. And it's about the warlord in Afghanistan who's talking to an American, and he looks down at the American's left wrist, the watch, and he said, "You Americans have all the watches. We have all the time." And that really does say it. Let me leave the battlefields for a moment and talk about something else that happened in 3.5 years. We're running out of allies. This administration has abandoned some and insulted others. It's abandoned the Czech Republic, abandoned Poland, insulted the United Kingdom, abandoned Honduras, insulted Israel, abandoned President Mubarak of Egypt, who has been a loyal ally for 3 decades, who's maintained the peace in the Mideast. When he got in trouble, we let him get in trouble. Worse than that, we formally wanted him to go. Tonight, I can't tell you whether Mubarak is dead or alive. No one seems to care. This guy was our ally. And we're fighting a war. It's bad enough to be disloyal during the time of peace, but to be disloyal to an ally during a time of war is beyond my comprehension. The last we saw of him, he was in a cage in a courtroom near Cairo. Tonight, as I said, I don't know if he's dead or alive, but he's probably in prison or in a hospital, one of the two. But he's like, no one talks about him. We abandoned President Saleh of Yemen, President Ben Ali of Tunisia. We have made a precedent of abandoning allies. To the question of does any other ally think that we're going to do if they get in trouble? You know, what's King Abdullah of Jordan thinking? God, what if there are demonstrations against me? Can I count on the United States? It used to be, of course. Now it isn't, of course. King Mohammed in Morocco, longtime ally. What's he thinking? He already has a parliament that's Islamist. King Hamad of Bahrain, he hosts the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. What do they think? To be a friend of the United States has become very dangerous, and I recognize that. There are so many things that I wish someone in this administration had told him. I mean, look, I don't know who would have done any good. I could give you hundreds of things that President Nixon, who was not just in my mind, but the greatest expert of foreign policy in all of our lives. He just was. And I've talked to people who were opposed to President Nixon. They'll all agree on that one. And the way in which every chief of state, even after he left office, wanted to visit with him because they always learned from him. Well, I know that President Obama first, he's a Democrat, and I understand that, so he isn't going to quote or say things very complimentary about a former president who's a Republican. Or he isn't going to say, gee, wasn't it terrific when President Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and the wall was torn down. That isn't going to happen. But this is what mystifies me. Why doesn't he take those things that were said by a hero of Democrats, justifiably, President Kennedy? He complimented him a lot while he was running. He never refers to him anymore. Never. Why not? We can only guess at the why not. But President Kennedy gave a great inaugural address, and it was very unique. It was unique because other than one sentence that dealt with domestic matters, other than one sentence, the entire address was about foreign policy and United States regarding other nations of the world, the whole address. And there was one line in it that got a tremendous reception all over the world. It became the best remembered line probably of any speech an American had given, particularly in those nations that were captive nations and by refugees. I traveled a lot during that period of time, and during that period of time, they would repeat it to me, an American. Sometimes I didn't even know what they were saying because they were saying it in their own language, but I could catch on with it as they went on because of the pacing and the rhythm and some of the words. And this is what President Kennedy said. And I'm doing this intentionally because he's a Democrat. This isn't partisanship. President Kennedy said, "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we will pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty." My God, what a great line. I got to tell you, President Nixon loved that line. It just sums it up. Let me just take the little divisions of that statement and see whether if we're doing those things today. He started out by saying we'd pay any price. Do you think we'd pay any price? This president, President Obama, has cut defense by $489 billion this fiscal year. January the 2nd, it'll be cut another $600 billion if sequestration goes through. That's a total of over $1 trillion. You know, I know figures and statistics are one thing, but this is what it means. It means that if that comes about, we will have the lowest level of the United States Army since before World War II. The lowest level of funds for the U.S. Marine Corps since before World War II. We will have the lowest level of the United States Air Force since it became an independent service. And we'll have a level for the U.S. Navy that's commensurate with the Woodrow Wilson administration. That's what we'll have. No, we don't seem to be paying any price. Quite the opposite. Then he said, bear any burden. Is it a burden to maintain the superiority in manned space exploration. Just maintain it. Is that a great burden when we won so much by having it? The superiority that's existed from the late 60s forward. If you want to be an astronaut now, if you are an astronaut now, if you want to go into space, you're not going to be sent to Cape Canaveral. You're going to be sent to Kazakhstan. And you're going to go to what was called Space City. It was really Tyuratam, but they called it Space City when the Soviet Union built it during the race for space. And you're going to be launched from a Russian rocket. Then, the next line was meet any hardship. Are we meeting really the hardship that we have to meet to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon? This is what we do. This is the hardships that we endure, writing new resolutions to pass in the United Nations, none of which will pass, or if any of them do, so watered down by Russia and China that they are insignificant. Having sanctions against Iran that only hurt the people. Tyrannies don't give a darn about economic sanctions. They never do, because they don't care about their own people. Tyrannies don't care about their own. We've seen evidences of that throughout our lifetimes. They care about themselves. And economic sanctions don't hurt the leaders. And it isn't going to hurt the Ayatollah Khamenei. I have one thought that we could do diplomatically, since that seems to be the only course this administration is willing to take. I'm not saying that this is going to stop there. I'm not saying that this is the resort we're going to have to resort. We're going to have to resort militarily. Either Israel is, or the United States is, or both of us are. But let me just say one thing in the interim. Why don't we call for an emergency meeting of the Security Council and the General Assembly and advance a resolution that we want signed tonight, ejecting Iran from membership in the UN because it has violated the UN Charter, and we are one of the founding nations of the United Nations based on that charter, which has been so violated since 1979 by acts of war that the UN just sits by and lets go and they let these acts of war commence without any punishment. I'm talking about, obviously, an act of war when they took over an embassy, hours, when they held diplomats, foreign diplomats, hours, hostage for 444 days. Go through the whole calendar from 79 forward. But very recently, who attempted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. And so we ask for this resolution of ejection of Iran. Obviously, it isn't going to pass. But what I'd like attached to it is our ambassador says, and if you don't do that tonight, the United States of America is going to eject itself from the United Nations. And this would give us a moral basis. We can't live under a charter that's violated. We can't be a part of an organization that permits the violation of its own charter. And I believe, well, first off, just the introduction of such a thing would be tremendous psychologically against the government, not the people, but the government of Iran. And secondly, boy, nothing lost by the United States. We say either eject Iran or we're going to eject ourselves. And all those UN representatives, they know what that means. It means the end of the UN, it means the end of the funds, it means the end of the headquarters, it means the end of their terrific living and fun living in New York City, the end of all that. They would be on the telephone or whatever they used to communicate with the chief of state of their nation saying, we got to eject Iran, because too much would be gone for them if we ejected ourselves. But do it. Do it if we have to. It would be fine to do it. Then he said, support any friend. I've already been through that. I've talked about it, Mubarak and others. One that I really didn't go into, and I'm not going to go into it at length right now, but I want to state this one thing. On May the 19th of last year, President Obama gave a speech on the Mideast. And near the beginning of it, he proposed that Israel go back to the borders that it had in 1967, based on the borders of 1967. Do you know what he was saying? He was saying before Israel won the war. Oh, that's just absurd. We've never even done that to an enemy. North Vietnam won a war. We didn't say, now go back to this 1975 borders. You know what we did? We have diplomatic relations with them. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam, that includes what used to be North and South Vietnam, with, of course, North Vietnam being the official government. It's Hanoi is the capital of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. And we have trade relations. What if someone told, look, that's an enemy. We lost, what, over 57,000 American lives. And that's what we did. We didn't say go back to the 75 lines. What if someone tells us to go back to the 1775 lines of Great Britain, with Great Britain? Think we're going to do it? Or more recent history, but not really contemporary. What if the lines before the Mexican-American War? We would be meeting tonight in Yorba Linda, Mexico. We're not going to do that. Like it or not, that's the way most borders have been decided by war. Too bad, but that's the way it is. And you can say all that you want to, but to do that, and to do that to a friend, to me, is absolutely unthinkable. The last line that he said in that speech was oppose any foe, that we would oppose any foe. God, we had a golden opportunity recently. It was 2009 when the people of Iran were demonstrating in the streets against their government. They held up banners. The banner said, Obama, exclamation point, Obama, exclamation point. You are either with them or you're with us. We've had a more recent view of people who are now in captive nations. Syria. They held up banners. This is the beginning of May. Banners that said, help us or we will all be killed. They're being killed. I think the end of all of this is to understand what it is the radical Islamists want to achieve. The defeat of the United States. That's what they want to achieve. And we cannot forget that. Al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, said, we are going to defeat the United States just as it was defeated in Vietnam in 1975, as it was defeated in Lebanon in 1983, and as it was defeated in Somalia in 1993. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said, we will soon see a world without the United States. And so often we are told about or see on television or read about demonstrations in the streets of so many countries where the chant is death to America. They mean it. So the purpose of the book is that we win the war. And more important than that, more important than the purpose of any book, I shouldn't say of any book, but certainly of this one, the importance to the next president of the United States that he recognizes that their destination is to defeat the United States, and that he doesn't say we're going to end involvement in this battle or that battle by particular dates, but that he uses the term victory and means it. That's it. Thank you. Any questions or comments or anything that you want?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone over to you so that, and this young lady has already done that, and if you'd state your name and your question.
Betsy Speicher, and I'd like to know who you would like to see as Secretary of State in a Romney administration.
Okay. No. Frankly, Secretary of State to me is totally irrelevant because Secretary of State is a crummy job. It's a great job for someone who wants to get international prestige. The job is National Security Advisor. Condoleezza Rice, in my view, made a terrible mistake in terms of clout, real clout, when she accepted Secretary of State for what she had, National Security Advisor. That's the job. That's the job where you can walk in the Oval Office every day, darn near at the time that you want to do it. If you're Secretary of State, it'll probably be once a week. And if you want an appointment beyond that, a scheduled meeting once a week with the Secretary of State, between the President and Secretary of State, you got to call and ask for an appointment like anybody else. And you're over a mile away from the White House rather than right across a very narrow hallway in the West Wing. That's the important job. And generally, Secretaries of State get so indoctrinated by their bureaucracy that though they start by representing the president to the bureaucracy, they often end up representing the bureaucracy to the president, rather than, I might have said that wrong, rather than representing the president to the bureaucracy, they represent the bureaucracy to the president. And that's what happens in a lot of cabinet posts, but not White House staff and not National Security Advisor. Who would I like to see National Security Advisor? John Bolton. The guy knows his stuff.
Question here from Kevin Cartwright.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Kevin.
Among your many credits as award-winning documentarian, have you seen 2016? And I'd be interested how many people have seen 2016 as well.
I have not. I just don't go to the movies anymore. And I recognize that this is probably one that I would be thrilled about. I do. I think he is a remarkable, tremendous guy. I have one, and it's not, certainly, this is not in any sense a criticism. First, how could I criticize? I haven't even seen it. But what I tried to do in my book, I don't make any psychoanalysis. I don't say anything, not one sentence that isn't fact. I get in arguments with liberals all the time. You can get in, look, what if we started getting in an argument about does Obama choose the path he's on because, particularly with the United Kingdom, because of colonialism? I don't want to get into that. How the devil do I know? I don't. I want to talk about things I know. And as long as I do, I don't get into petty debates with liberals. As soon as you get into a petty debate, you lose. Because I would have to say, I don't know. Well, they would say, well, they do. I mean, look, it ain't worth it to me. To quote George Washington, he's the one who said it ain't worth it to me. But I want to be able to say that what is in this book is true. It's accurate. Yes, it's editorialized, but you can easily tell an editorialization. When I say the next president is going to be a president, a wartime president, you could call that an editorialization. But it isn't an accusation. It isn't something personal about President Obama. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to stop anyone who wants to do that, but I don't.
Question in the front row.
Let me preface my question by saying, Bruce, I bring you regards from a young lady who met you here just about 9 years ago exactly, right after you published Passport, which she still has and treasures.
Who is that?
My daughter.
Oh, gee, that's great to hear.
She was 11 then, she's 20 now.
That's terrific.
Still has your book and still treasures it.
That's
My
terrific.
question is, obviously, one of your early comments, which is whoever wins the presidency will become a war president. Do you think there's any chance that if Romney wins by projecting the same sort of message that Kennedy did, he can avoid becoming a war president? In other words, sort of peace through strength.
Look, I don't want to sound pessimistic. I don't know. A lot of it has to do, however, with how strong he is and how strong the perception may be of him by foreign. Look what happened. I talked about the hostages that were kept 444 days. I think most of you know when they were released. On January the 20th of 1981, 33 minutes after President Reagan said, "I solemnly swear, so help me God." Why? During the campaign, he certainly talked against Iran, but he never said he was going to do anything in particular. Scared to death of this guy. They were so scared that they started negotiating with the Carter administration 2 days after the November election, November the 2nd of 1980. That was the election. November the 4th, they were negotiating. I will say I think the negotiations were terrible. Negotiations with tyrannies are always terrible. They won much too much. But we got our hostages back, and we got our hostages back 33 minutes after Reagan was inaugurated. Why? Because they were scared. They knew what Carter did do and didn't do and would do and wouldn't do. They had no idea what President Reagan would do. It was all based on perception. So if they perceive that Romney, and I'll just say this, President Nixon had a unique administration in which not one nation fell to the forces of communism. Not one nation. That's unique. You can go back over all those presidents, too bad, but it happened, one after another. He didn't. And chiefs of state had tremendous respect for him. Tremendous. May I interrupt myself or interrupt you just for 1 second? I just want to tell you some things. He could take a little country. He could say, there's a conflict going on right now. You won't read about it in the papers. In Burkina Faso, little country in Africa. No one talks about it. I don't think the people at New York Times ever heard of it. And that conflict can get larger and go to the border with Ghana. And from Ghana, it can go to Nigeria. If it goes to Nigeria, which it could easily do, it'll affect the oil supply, a great deal of it, to Europe. If that should happen, it'll affect the United States. I mean, sitting there talking like this. My God. And he knows these things, and he knows the chiefs of state of all of these countries. And he knows them well, and he has memorized details. He will say the difference, one of the differences between Khrushchev and Brezhnev, Khrushchev, who was the leader of the chairman, the leader of the Soviet Union when President Nixon was vice president, and then Brezhnev when he was president. He said one of the differences, and he says, Khrushchev never wore cufflinks. Brezhnev always wears them. You think, good Lord, man. But it doesn't sound important, but it is. It presents a visual picture to you. And he knew the big picture, and he knew the little details. It was just really, really magnificent. Sorry, I interrupted myself, but I wanted to do that. Yeah.
In the rear of the room here.
What could you say based on Obama's actions, all of his actions that he's taken in foreign affairs up to this point? Where do you see his vision of us in 2016, and where does he ultimately trying to take us with these?
I'm so sorry. For some reason, it just didn't flow to my ears. Would you repeat?
With President Obama's actions,
Right.
that he's taken so far, where do you think this will lead us, and where do you think he wants to lead us with his actions and the policies that he's undertaking?
Well, I don't want to prophesy anything, but where it'll lead us is to what I've said, that whoever takes that oath of office next January the 20th is going to be a wartime president. I can say no more. It depends on whether or not that president is going to be strong enough and convince other nations that's strong enough that we don't have to use the power that we'd like very much not to have to use. But one of the ways that I believe you won't have to is to give the impression that you will. Everyone knows that we have the most powerful, the best military in the world. Every chief of state knows that. They also know we'll never use it. They've seen that. We will not use it. Therefore, the most powerful military in the world could be 19 guys hijacking an airplane. They're the most powerful because they'll use it. And that is important to know. That is important to know, that this tremendous military that we have, that no one can be critical. I mean, it's tremendous. Best military in the history of the world. That we don't allow our power to be used. Everyone will immediately, when they talk about Iran, they'll say, but no, of course, no boots on the ground. What are you talking about? You're already taking that off the table? You know, some negotiator you are. We're not going to have boots on the ground. Maybe airstrikes. Don't say anything. And don't even say all options are on the table, because that's probably where they're going to stay. You know, it's silly. You got to give the perception of you're going to use it. You're going to use everything. And I know that this is a long time ago now, but in the White House there were books of contingencies. Books of contingencies of everything from doing nothing to using the bomb. Anyone sees those contingencies that say, my God, who put this in here? But yeah, that's what you do. It's everything you can think of, and every contingency that can happen anywhere in the world. What do? When I hear, I apologize for not giving a quick answer, but when I hear presidential aspirants, as we have in the 20 debates of the party in which I'm in, when I hear them say, on day one, I'm going to do so-and-so, no, they're not. They are not going to do it on day one. Let's say I am going to repeal Obamacare on day one. How many times have you heard that from aspirants? No, it isn't going to happen on day one. You're not going to repeal it on day 10, not on day 100, and not on day 1,000, because you can't. You can't because you don't have that power. It's already a law that has been passed by both houses of the Congress and signed by the preceding presidents of the United States. You're not going to be a dictator. You better not be. You have to live with what we have. And what you must do, if you want to, Governor Romney does not use that expression on day number one, he's going to repeal it. You must get a Congress who is going to vote for that repeal. A president can advocate domestic policy. He can advocate economic policy, but the Congress appropriates. A president, however, can have final jurisdiction over foreign policy. The Congress can't. You can't have 535 commanders-in-chief. And so if a President Clinton, he couldn't get his health care through, but he walked into Bosnia. He walked into Kosovo. I don't think there was one member of Congress who even knew he was going to do it. He sent the troops to Haiti. Fine, good for him. I think he was right in everything that he did in terms of Bosnia and Kosovo and Haiti. President Bush, 43, he wanted to pass Social Security reform. Couldn't get it. He wanted to pass immigration reform. Couldn't get it. But man, he went into Afghanistan and he went into Iraq. Good for him. And that's what presidents do. That is the stuff of presidents.
On your left, sir.
Thank you very much for being here this evening. You're certainly bringing clarity to the cacophony, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Question I have is really based on some very early comments you made this evening. You seem to suggest that we're going to have a very close election. Is that how you see it? And if a follow-up could be there, I know you're making the foreign policy argument, which I think is exactly right. Is one of these guys going to make it based on their economic policy or their health care reform policy? Thank you.
Yeah, good question, and I don't have the answer for it. It certainly appears to me that everyone is saying that analysts who have looked at this, and even past history, that Americans are going to vote their pocketbook. Maybe so, probably so. But whether they vote their pocketbook or they don't, we're going to have a wartime president. And if you look back at past presidents, and I'm not going to go through the whole chronology, but you say, if you had to make one particular thing that they did, one policy that they remember him most for, I'm not talking about assassination or scandal or anything like that, but one policy, what is it? Invariably, it's something in foreign policy. Truman, it's no question, atom bomb. Ike, Korea. Kennedy, Cuban Missile Crisis. Johnson, Vietnam. Nixon, Vietnam and China. Ford, in all honesty, I can't think of either domestic or foreign. It isn't something that just sticks out. I mean, it does to me. It's the surrender of Vietnam and Cambodia, but no, most people don't even know he was president when they surrendered. But there isn't anything, not anything. Then with Carter, of course, the Iranian hostage crisis. I mean, you can go. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but that's generally what it is, and it's for a good reason. They have jurisdiction over foreign policy, period. And a lot of them realize it towards the end of their administration. Some of them never realize it. And I do know that two presidents knew it, that I'm positive knew it. One was Kennedy and one was Nixon. And Nixon's administration was in totality absorbed in foreign policy because he knew he could do what he wanted to do, but he couldn't do what he wanted to do in domestic affairs. No president can. That isn't the way that isn't, but if people understood really civics, and I don't think it's taught well, they would know that if they're interested in foreign policy, be darn careful who they vote for president. If they're interested in domestic policy, be darn careful who you vote for your representative and senator. That's just the way that it is. It isn't that they don't have effect on the other thing. They do. They have effect on foreign policy. There's some effect from the Congress, and the domestic policy, some effect from the president. But that's advocacy. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Please.
Hi, Bruce. It's good to see you at the library again. My question is in regards to Israel and Iran. There's been a lot of headlines recently, and I was wondering if Israel acts alone without any U.S. backing, how do you think that'll affect the presidential election? And do you think a lot of people will pay more attention to that and shift the focus more from economics to foreign policy?
I got to tell you that one concerns me very much, because Netanyahu is going through a period now where he has to weigh survival of his nation. We all know that. He has to look at these days between the next 76 days, the Obama administration, and what will either be the Obama administration or the Romney administration from January the 20th forward. He has to. I mean, you can't help but look at that. If he should attack Iran during the period between tonight and the election, Obama has got to support Israel. Has to, because he knows the consequences with the people of the United States would be severe not to support them. Netanyahu has to know that. So that might be a good time for him to strike. Do you follow me on that? Now, he might, if he wants to bet that Romney's going to win, he might want to wait. But boy, it's a tough bet right now. The worst period of all for Netanyahu would be the period between November the 6th and January the 20th, with Obama leaving the White House, knowing that he's going to exit if Romney should win, and Romney not in yet. That would be the worst period. Netanyahu has got away all of those things. Too bad, but he does. I think if Obama follows his instincts, which I base on his May 19th speech of last year, he wouldn't support Israel at all. He'd let it take its course. He's done everything in his power to see that it doesn't attack Iran. But if his instincts have nothing to do with it, if it's going to be win or lose his election, that's what would take precedence. And so he would support Israel if it should happen between now and the election.
We have time for two more, sir.
You talked a little bit about the defense budget being lower, and that's a risk, and nuclear proliferation. But what about drones? Do drones make the world safer or riskier?
What about the world's safer and what? Well, it's certainly riskier for enemies of the United States. I think drones are terrific. I mean, I just think it's marvelous. We finally devised a way where we can kill the enemy without killing ourselves. Is there someone complaining about this? I mean, well, gee whiz. I mean, I just think that's absolutely superb. As far as I'm concerned, the more drone strikes in Afghanistan, the better. Yeah. And Pakistan, frankly.
All right. Let's see. One more right here. This gentleman is raising his hand.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, I've also heard commentaries about the fact that Netanyahu may strike before the election for the very reasons that you point out. And hopefully, you know, the polls will show that our man will be elected and maybe delay it. But what I wanted to ask about, on KABC this week at 8 o'clock, that's 790 on the dial, one of the co-commentators there is giving a series of talks on the demise of the Republican Party in California. And it talks about, it started in '92 with Prop 187 and probably your feet. And my question for you is there anything that you can see that where the Republicans can come back to California to be in power like it used to be? Thank you.
I don't know. I simply don't know. I'm not well-versed on state politics, certainly not well-versed enough to say this is what we have to do. I have seen that we've lost election after election after election, and when we win an election, it was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is an extraordinarily good, decent man, but not a very good governor. That's the way it is. He is an extraordinary man, but not a good governor, and not one who has a solid foundation in a particular philosophy. And that's really what we need. We need candidates who believe in something and aren't afraid to say what they believe in. I mean, look at the way that when they do, they really come to the fore. Look what happened in Wisconsin. Gee, that's tremendous, just tremendous. Look at Vice President-elect, he isn't Vice President-elect Ryan. I mean, you know the guy knows his stuff. You know the guy means it, and he's going to take a chance on saying something off the cuff because he isn't restricted to a book of talking points, which most people in politics are. They'll all say the same thing. If you don't watch them on television, if you don't read the lines in the newspaper by who said it, could all be the same person. And that's why when someone like Ryan comes along, it's thrilling. He's a guy who has guts. You know he's going to make a mistake or two because he talks off the cuff. It happens. But he hasn't, in my view, he hasn't made any. And he's awfully good. So I don't know. In short, I don't know. I don't know enough about what's going on right now in the legislature, and I don't want to start guessing at those things. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.